Let's introduce Pandemic. Pandemic is a cooperative game for 2 to 4 players. You are all working together, traveling around the world, trying to cure 4 diseases that are threatening mankind. In Pandemic, all players immediately win upon curing 4 diseases. This is done using actions such as moving around the board, treating diseases, sharing knowledge, building research stations, and discovering cures. Can you save humanity? This is how you set up a game of Pandemic. The first thing you do is you put matching colored vials on the board, as you see there. Next, the outbreak marker goes on the 0 space, placed there. For the infection rate, you place a marker at the 2 space, and then we have to infect 9 cities. We do this by removing 9 cards off the top of the infection deck. The first 3 cards, you put 3 disease cubes on each city there. So as we could see, Sydney was the first card drawn, and I put 3 cubes in Sydney. You do this for the first 3 cards, and notice they're color-coded, so that helps where you place the cubes, as well as there's a pinpoint on a map to help you determine where that city is. The next 3 cards, you put 2 cubes on the board, and then the last 3 cards, you put 1 cube on the board. This will change every game because you'll be drawing different cities and also in different combinations. The next thing we do is we give every player a roll card and a reference card. Then we give them a number of player cards dependent on the number of players in the game. 4 cards are given here because it's set up for a 2-player game. With the roll card, you take the matching pawn, as we see a white pawn here, and we put it in Atlanta, as well as a research station. Why Atlanta? Because that's the home of the CDC, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. I put a green pawn here because I'm going to play the quarantine specialist with green color here. And the last thing we do is we have to do the player deck. We break up the rest of the player cards into roughly 4 equal stacks. We're going to put an epidemic card on the top of each stack. 4 cards are used here for an easy game. You can make the game harder by making it 5 cards in 5 piles or 6 cards in 6 piles. Then we're going to shuffle each pile. Just do a minor shuffle here. And what you're going to do is you're going to take each pile and then put it on top of the other. And finally, and this forms the player deck, which we move onto the board here. And now we're ready to play Pandemic. On a player's turn, they have 4 actions. Since this is a cooperative game, everybody can give advice on how to use those actions. Of course, a player is free to choose to heed or ignore that advice. There are 4 movement actions, and there are 4 other actions you can perform. The 4 movement actions are as follows. You can drive or ferry. What that means is you take your pawn and you move it to a city that's connected to the city you are in. So here we have from Atlanta with this line going to Washington. The next thing you do is you can do a direct flight. You discard a city card from your hand, so in this case Jakarta, and that means you can fly to Jakarta. So we take our pawn and move it to Jakarta, down here. The other thing we can do is a charter flight. If you happen to discard a card that matches the city you're in, you can fly anywhere. So let's say I was in Jakarta from a different way, and then I play a Jakarta card. I can now fly out of Jakarta to any city on the board. The last thing I can do for movement is a shuttle flight. This requires at least 2 research stations, and this means you can move from one research station to another research station. That's a shuttle flight. The other actions are as follows. You can build a research station. You do this by being in a particular city and then playing a card of that city. So here my pawn is in London, and I can play a London card out of my hand. Then I can build a research station. That's an action. The other thing I can do is I can treat a disease. Whether or not there's a research station, I can take a cube out of the city I'm in and remove it off the board. Another action I can do is share knowledge. What that means is if I'm in a city with another pawn, I can give a card to that player, or that player can give a card to me, but it must match the city I'm in. So in this case, only Atlanta could be given because that's the city we're in. The last thing we can do is discover a cure. By being in a research station, you can discard 5 cards of the matching color, of any matching color. So here we have 5 blue cards, and we're in a city with a research station. For this action, we can discover a cure for blue. So you discard the 5 cards from your hand, and you bring the vial up to show that you've discovered the cure for blue. After a player has done their 4 actions, and by the way, a player can do the same action more than once, it's time to draw 2 cards from the player deck. These go into the hand of the player. As long as they have 7 or less cards, they're good, otherwise they have to discard. They're done as a player, and now they become the infector. They have to infect cities. You look at the infection rate. Currently it's on 2. That means we're going to draw 2 cards from the infection deck, and we're going to place cubes onto the board. The first card, Bangkok. We take a red disease cube and put it on Bangkok. The second card is Baghdad. We take a black disease cube and put it in Baghdad. Now the player is done and the next player's turn begins. And that's the end of a player's turn. It would be the turn of the next player. However, if one or both of the cards drawn from the player deck were epidemic, something else would happen. 3 things happen when an epidemic is drawn. The first is you increase the infection rate, sliding over the marker 1 space. The next thing is infect. In this case, you take the bottom card from the infection deck, in this case, Karachi, and we put 3 cubes onto that city. The last step is intensify. We take the infection discard pile, shuffle it, and put it back on top of the infection deck. Remember 2 things when an epidemic is drawn. First, you don't replace the card. Second, you still have to infect cities. So in this case, we have an infection rate of 2. We have to draw 2 cards as part of the infect city step. Ho Chi Minh City, we place a red cube there. And our second card, Kolkata. This is an outbreak situation. Whenever you have to place a 4th cube of the same color in a city, you don't do that. Instead, you place a cube of that color in every city that's connected to that city. So in this case, Kolkata is connected to Hong Kong, Bangkok, Chennai, and Delhi. And you also have to move the outbreak marker 1 step. There's only one way to win pandemic: cure all 4 diseases. If you've not done that, there are 3 ways to lose pandemic. The first way is if the outbreak marker reaches the skull and crossbones. The second way is if you have to add a disease cube to the board and there's none left to place. The last way is if you have to draw a card from the player deck and there are none left. Since there are multiple ways to lose pandemic, here are some cards that will help you on your path to victory. These are role cards. Everybody gets one, and they have special abilities. Use them efficiently. There are also event cards in the player deck. These can help you by being used anytime, and they do not cost an action to use. And that's how you play Pandemic. As always, have fun. Can you save humanity?